Random thoughts. In this video, I'm going to read a part of Douglas Jardine's book, The Mad Mullah of Somaliland. Now, this is a book that was published in early 1920s, and it's a book that covers the Dervish Wars. These are wars that were fought in British Somaliland from 1899 to early 1920s, and they were led by one Mohammed Abdullah Hassan, who the British came to call as the Mad Mullah. Now, in this part, we are going to see how the British created a genocide so that they could take back control of the colony. And this happened after the British had fought four expeditions or had engaged in four expeditions to fight the dervishes, the people who were fighting, or the force that was led by Muhammad Abdullah Hassan. They had attempted to defeat them four times and they had failed. Around 1909, the British decided to withdraw from the interior of the colony and just let it free and move and occupy just the coastal towns. That includes Berbera, of course. But even before they withdrew, they had a plan in place to make sure that they come back, and they withdraw. But then they put in place a plan that ended up causing a lot of damage, but it ended up achieving what they wanted to achieve, nevertheless. And the plan was to arm the different groups of Somalis, different clans and sub-clans, give them weapons, and then instigate some conflicts. And that ended up causing deaths, a lot of deaths. Actually, Douglas Jardine estimates that probably up to a quarter of the male population was eliminated due to that, those chaos, to those conflicts that were created by the British, so that the Somali people will invite them back to colonize them, because the idea was, of course, to make them feel like the British were the savior, or the presence of the British gave them peace. We are going to read and see what Douglas Jardine says about that, but I need to point out that in another video, I did read a part where Douglas Jardine did mention the plan to arm the different Somali clans, but in that part, he talks of the clans that were friendly to the British. But it seems like they armed very many groups, and in the end, all these groups started fighting one another. And of course, we might speculate how they ended up fighting one another. But let's read this part and see what he says. He says, with the new regime, indescribable disorder immediately ensued, exceeding all anticipations, and the tribes abandoning themselves to an orgy of internecine warfare, used against each other the arms and ammunitions which had been doled out to them for defense against the common foe. So he acknowledges that these different groups were using the weapons that had been given to them to fight one another, while these weapons, at least officially, were meant to be used to defend themselves against Muhammad Abdullah Hassan. That was the idea. The idea was that as the British were withdrawing from the interior, there were these clans of the Somalis that had been on their side, had fought by their side, and it was argued that by just letting them be like that, they were going to be vulnerable to Muhammad Abdullah Hassan. So the idea was to arm them so that they are able to defend and protect themselves. But what ended up happening is that these groups ended up fighting one another. In fact, they were not even fighting Muhammad Abdullah Hassan. They were fighting each other or one another, the groups that had been given the weapons to defend themselves. He continued to say, the cause was not so much the desire of any one tribe for supreme control as the Somalis, besetting sin of acquisitiveness, which impels him to raid his neighbors' flocks and herd if he can. So he said these raids were not so much about controlling any other group. It was just basically to acquire livestock. We can call it cattle rustling. It was also a golden opportunity to pay off old scores and to revive ancient feuds. So he says these groups ended up starting fighting over other issues, old wrongs that had been done to one group, and they would decide that this is the time to actually go out there and settle issues. He continues, fratricidal strife this fratricidal strife was not confined to razzias by one tribe upon another, but extended to civil war between rival combination of the same tribe. So it basically became everyone was fighting everyone. We are going to believe Douglas Jardine. He continues, with this situation, the local government, penned within the defenses of Berbera, were powerless to deal. It had been hoped that by assisting the peaceful tribes and by withholding subsidies and ammunition from the recalcitrant, by cutting off their food supplies from Berbera and seizing their caravans on arrival at the coast, the less amenable tribesmen could be brought into line. Now, here he acknowledges something. He acknowledges some evil planning on the side of the British. He says that the thinking was that by arming the friendly groups and also by basically blockading the ones that were not on the side of the British, those ones, the latter ones, were going to be brought to line, that they were going to be made to submit. But this hope proved entirely delusive. So this plan did not work. The plan of arming the friendly groups and then using them to squeeze the others who are not friendly to the British did not work very well as they expected. So in the end, in fact, Douglas Jardine admits that a huge chunk of the population ended up being killed throughout that chaos. In fact, he puts a number at around a quarter of the male population was eliminated out of that chaos. And of course, it achieved what they wanted to achieve. And not long after that, of course, the different groups of the Somalis started approaching the British, requesting them to come back to protect them because they were in total chaos. In fact, even Mohammed Abdullah Hassan himself reached out to the British, and he did write some letters that Douglas Jardine does share, where he asks the British that he needed to talk about peace because there was so much chaos on the land. But of course, looking at it today, you look back and knowing what we know about how these things are done, I think there was a conspiracy, and this was a conspiracy by the British and others, but of course, primarily the British, to have chaos reign on the land. It's that policy of you create a problem to become the solution. If there is no problem, then of course you are not needed, but then you create trouble and then you come in as the solution and people welcome you with open hands, like, yeah, come and help us. And I think that's what happened. Those are my random thoughts.